storytelling has enabled our species to evolve by being able to tell stories about where to find food, but being able to tell stories about sex, relationships, and by, most importantly, survival. And so, as a species, we are hardwired to be engaged by stories. And the reason is we live in a finite world, and all we know for sure is that we're not here forever. And the other thing we know for sure is that stuff happens to people. And whenever we hear about stuff happening to someone, we want to know what is next. We're compelled. And now, who's got a 3 or 4 year old at home? So when you got home last night, all your 2-year-old did was tell you stories. Pretty much. Exclusively. That's all 2-year-olds do. They just tell stories. This is what I did. This is what I saw. This is what I'm going to do. Come and look at this, Mom. Right? We are compulsive storytellers. It just, it's what human beings do. We tell stories. And so we were saying, Svetlana, that you have to realize that every time you give a presentation, you tell a story. Yeah? You went into storytelling mode when I asked you what sort of customers you would have. And then we could all see in our mind's eye the kind of customers that you were going to have. And I certainly saw you talking to people. And then you said they would trust you. And then I saw you interacting with people. I was going to ask you where you wanted your office to be, but that's what makes things real for people. So when we hear of things happening, we want to know what happens next, because then we will know what to do. So everything you see on television, every book you've ever read, every film that's ever been made is basically about stuff happening to people and what they do about it. So you go all the way back. Has anyone read Pinocchio? Anyone's kids read Pinocchio? That story is 4,000 years old. The basic plot of Pinocchio goes way back to prior to the Egyptians, 4,000 years old, because it has elements in it that engages us at some kind of extraordinary level. The stories that have been passed down that we still have now have elements in them that somehow keeps them alive. That's why it's so good to read classic stories, because they have elements in them that make them indestructible. And if you could find a few of those for your presentations. Because basically, as a presenter in the second half of your career, you are defining your legacy. This is what people will talk about when you retire. This is how people will know you, and this is your unique self. So you really, really, I think, obviously I'm biased, but the opportunities for personal growth from speaking and storytelling are priceless in a person's personal life as well as in their business life. So, why do we speak in a business setting? Why not just write to people? What is the unique properties? Let's just run through the unique properties, okay? We speak, obviously, to achieve understanding, and perhaps even more important, commitment. We can explain things, we can clarify things in a meeting or by speaking in a way that we can't necessarily do as effectively when we are writing. Influence. More and more you're required to influence people. We influence by speaking in a way that we cannot do when we are writing. We are able to persuade and encourage and inspire people when we are present with them and can see the responses. It's a dynamic communication. And perhaps most importantly, relationships. You will succeed when you are able to make other people successful. And that starts with
loyalty. How do you earn the loyalty of people? Well, I think first you pay attention to them. Second, you let them know that you understand them, and then you gain their trust, and then that trust becomes loyalty. And the success that you will have in your career is directly related to the number of people who are loyal to you at every level.
So what can you learn in this workshop? You'll learn how to prepare information to be heard. We have a writing brain and a speaking brain, and these different parts of the brain use a different language. When we write something to be read, we quite literally and unconsciously use a different style. This workshop has been offered to thousands of lawyers and accountants, and what we have found is that very often they are writing superb material, but it simply does not work when they try to deliver it verbally. The challenge is to translate what you want to talk about into conversational English. We will study and practice exactly how to do this over the course of this program.
It's quite ironical. We unconsciously shift the medium that we use. I have an idea. I know what I'll say at this client seminar, and so I write down that idea. And bingo, I am now in my writing brain. And I look at it, and I know a piece of good writing when I see it, and I know how it should go, and I just write it out, and I look at it, and I think, this is the perfect way to describe this. And so I read it out loud, and it sounds terrible. It doesn't sound like me. It doesn't sound like anybody else. It's awful. So the idea is, and you may already have this ability, the idea is more and more to be able to create presentations and craft responses that are designed for the ear rather than the eye. Because listening is much more of an emotional experience than it is an intellectual experience. You know, you give me the information that you have prepared, and I read it, and that's an intellectual experience. But when we talk about it, it's an emotional experience. It's an emotional exchange. This is quite hard for some people who say, well, I don't want to get into all this kumbaya stuff. But the reality is that our clients, they may make a decision based on logic, but they will take action based on emotion. They'll make a decision about what you're telling them from a logical perspective, but they have to feel right about you before they'll take action on that logical conclusion that they've reached. I mentioned that we've been around for 150,000 years, and we've only been in a relatively safe environment for maybe a couple of generations. We could not have met here 100 years ago in safety. Deb, you could not have traveled here in safety. Special arrangements would have to be made, and so on. And most of us lived in the countryside, and there were no flat roads or whatever the terrain had to be navigated. We're very, very physical, and we might be attacked by persons or animals or whatever. And we're talking about 100,000 years of this. And the only ones of us that have survived because we are the descendants of the ones who knew how to be safe, who knew how to fight, who knew how to run away, who knew how to detect danger. And all of this system, this phenomenal system that human beings is totally present in modern people. So that my body automatically reacts whenever I encounter any kind of threat or danger, or even when I think about threat or danger. So what happens without my even being aware is the cortisone levels change in my brain. The adrenal glands produce adrenaline. My blood pressure increases. The circulation goes from my external organs into my internal organs, and the digestive system shuts down because you don't need to be digesting food while you're fighting or running away. So that's why you get a dry mouth. And your shoulders begin curl round and the pelvis tips up. If you try to stand up straight this way, you'll begin to tremble and your hands will be a little cold. The pupils dilate so that you can see the enemy, which might be that your listeners in this case, more clearly. But now you can't read your notes. So all of this happens automatically. And we need to just appreciate that and maybe even be a little fond of that. I mean, we're pretty miraculous creatures. But when you understand and embrace these things that are happening and realize that they're happening to everyone at a different level, and when we bring some common sense to it, which is you're about as good as the amount of speaking you've done, and it's a series of skills, and like every skill, it gets better if you practice. If you don't practice, you won't get better. People say, John, I'll do anything. I've got to be a better speaker. I'll do anything. What? And I say, well, first, you have to speak more. Oh, no, I won't do that. Right. Ask a golfer. Ask a tennis player. Ask anyone who plays any sport. You know, how would you get better? Well, by doing it. Speaking is absolutely no different. The difference is that you can plan safe practice opportunities. You don't have to confront the monster over and over again. You need to find safe opportunities, maybe just with one person, maybe just on your own, reading aloud. So these are the kind of strategies we're going to look at over the next couple of days. And for those of you who are determined to become a much better than average speaker, if you've decided that, it will happen. It's like gravity. It's inevitable. It's not mysterious. It may not be currently your preferred way of communicating, but you can be very, very good at it in a relatively short period of time. I should add, the bar is not very high, as you may have noticed if you've been to any presentations recently. You know, it's not too difficult. When was the last time you were in a meeting with more than 12 people where the speakers actually made eye contact continuously? So when we get our attention from focusing inwards to focusing outwards, then all your natural communication skills come through. And of course, you will be well prepared. If you're not well prepared, then you deserve your fate. It's hard to be sympathetic with someone who hasn't prepared.
So we'll talk about how you can use silence to be present, how you can manage your emotional state of being and take responsibility of being in control of the room. And when you are in control of the room, you will not be experiencing speaking anxiety. You might be excited, but that's not the same.
Looking at what's ahead, we are going to cover the benefits and consequences of speaking, the elements of verbal communication, and the elements of personal communication.